It was about 3 years ago, right before my 16th birthday. Me and my older brother were visiting my uncle with our dad. Now he lives up in the Poconos in Pennsylvania. It's a small cabin in the woods, which I know is extremely stereotypical for these kinds of stories, but this was my 5th or 6th time going there, so at the time it was nothing to be concerned about. Anyway, when we got there, we greeted my uncle and had some dinner. Eventually everyone fell asleep, except for me. I wasn't always the best sleeper, but this was different. It felt like I was being watched. Now, as I mentioned before, we were in the middle of nowhere. The closest house was probably 3 or 4 miles away, and it's not like this log cabin was placed in a prime tourist spot. It was more akin to Muir and Eustace's farm from Courage, right in the middle of bumfuck nowhere. I don't know what came over me, but something made me look through the window. When I did, I saw a light. It looked pretty deep into the woods, but definitely closer than any town or neighbor. I tried to wake my dad first, but he's a deep sleeper, so I had no luck. My uncle and brother were the same situation. Apple doesn't fall far from the tree, I guess. I don't know why, but I felt like I needed to go find out what it was. But this wasn't a feeling of curiosity. It was one of causation. Something about that dim orange glow put me in a state of alert. I opened my uncle's gun locker and took a small 5mm revolver, along with a handful of rounds, before grabbing my jacket and heading out of the cabin. I took 2 steps out the door and was instantly met with the "what the fuck are you doing right now" thought process. Then it was met with the same feeling of alarm. I really didn't have a good feeling about this. But I was the only one up. If some shit is going down, I have to at least try to make sure everyone will be okay. After about 5 or 10 minutes of debating my sanity, I finally said fuck it, managed to channel my inner Kurt Russell, and began walking forward, ready to take care of things. My R.J. McKeedy act lasted a good 15 minutes. But the more the porch light grew dim behind me, and the brighter the orange light in front of me got, the more my fear grew. Another 5 or so minutes and I was finally close enough to see what it was that was creating the light. And it made my blood run cold. What looked like dozens of men wearing all sorts of masks in the form of animal skulls, with long tattered brown robes, all circled around a large bonfire, chanting in what I could only comprehend as gibberish. I hid behind a tree as I watched what I assumed to be the leader, as his robes were a bright red and much better condition, stepped forward, and from there it all went to shit. The red-cloaked man, wearing what I think was bear skull, began yelling, "Bring forth the non-believer," over and over again as 2 other robed figures dragged a man towards him. The man was stripped ass naked, with a bag over his head, pleading for forgiveness as the leader held out what looked like a dead raccoon, or maybe a possum. He held the dead rodent over the man's head before cutting it open, letting its blood run down the man's head and chest. Suddenly the leader snapped his fingers, then without a second thought the 2 holding the man down tossed him into the fire. They just fucking threw him in without skipping a beat. That's when I saw enough. I backed away slowly before turning away and making a break back to the cabin. I tried to be as quiet as possible, so not to get caught, but stealth was not my main objective. As fucked up as it may sound, I was lucky the poor bastard tossed into the flame yelled loud enough to cover my footsteps across the leaf and twig-covered ground. When I made it back, I quickly shut and locked the door, before quickly shaking my dad awake, this time refusing to stop until he opened his eyes. The moment he woke up, I quickly started going on about what I had witnessed. He quickly rushed to the window to see the same light I had described. He proceeded to wake up my uncle, who in turn called the police. The next morning the police came to the cabin to tell us it was nothing but a bonfire. A few empty beer cans here and there, couple of cigarette butts. Of course they didn't find anything else. I thought to myself in annoyance. Luckily my dad and uncle didn't call me crazy or anything and told me to keep the pistol with me if it made me feel safer. I ended up holding onto it for the next 3 days. On the last night of our visit, I brought a chair to the window, along with the gun and 6-pack of Red Bull, and sat down. I spent about 4 hours waiting to see if the light would return. I looked at the clock. It was about 2 a.m. I sighed and looked back to the window and almost pissed myself, as my eyes met with one of the robed men outside the window, looking right at me. Looking at the man, donning a fox skull, I noticed that despite the tattered rags he was wearing, the skull mask was in great condition, no chips or stains, perfectly intact. The glass began to fog slightly, his chest rising and falling heavily. His head was slightly tilted, and his mouth was just barely visible. For a brief moment I had completely forgotten I was armed, and quickly drew the firearm and aimed, threatening to shoot. His only response was slowly placing his bony finger against the window, before waving with a smile that has been burned into my nightmares. before disappearing into the woods. I was scared solid. They knew I was there that night. They knew I saw them. They knew I witnessed what they did ... and now they knew where me and my family were. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, right as the sun was setting, when my dad, my brother, and I all left to head back home, I looked out the window deep into the woods. As we were nearly out of the driveway, I saw it again. The sudden appearance of a bright light deep into the woods. After all these years, we're going back this week. We have to sort through my uncle's stuff ... what's left of it anyways. The cops ruled it out as an accident, finding a half-smoked cigarette on the carpet. But I know who really did it, cause my uncle never smoked.